Podcasters Roundtable round 134. Who has time for old episodes anyways? Trash that back catalog. You don't need it. No one's listening to it. Oh, or are they? Should you promote that? We're going to talk a little bit about that and some other stories. Welcome back. Let's check out the roundtable today. Michael, welcome to your first round, man.
Hello. Thank you very much for having me.
And what's your podcast?
My podcast is 40 going on 14. It's myself and three guys I've known since college doing retro reminiscing. So we'll take old movies that we loved as kids, so say Conan the Barbarian, and compare it to remakes, reboots, or similar movies of the now. So
very cool. And that's like a takeoff. There was a movie, the 30 going on 30. It's not a movie fan podcast, is it?
No,
but it is.
We cover all sorts of like when Prince passed away, we did a whole show on Prince from the 70s, 80s till now. We did a whole show on Eddie Murphy. So
cool. All right, co-host Dave Jackson, welcome back.
Glad to be here, Ray. Dave Jackson, schoolofpodcasting.com.
Feeling blue today, Dave?
Or green, if you'd like.
Oh, that's a joke for the video viewers.
That's right.
Oh, whoa.
Dave, live from hell.
I like the red. Dave showing off colors in his lights. He got a recently new toy, I guess, RGB lights.
It's two little LED lights. They're like $10 a piece. And I had a blank wall and presto. So
sweet. All right. And Candace, welcome to your first roundtable.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
What's your podcast?
So my podcast is Ambition, Honey, and Hustle. And that's a daily podcast. It's all about helping professionals, corporate professionals in particular, avoid the slow moving career, try to break away from the 9-to-5 and do what they love and make a big impact in the world.
Very cool. And occasional co-host guest. I'm not sure what he is. We'd established maybe he might be two people in one. We don't know. Evo Terra, welcome back, bud.
Thank you very much, Ray. Nice to be here. Hi, kids. Welcome. Evo Terra. Let's see. What do I want to talk about? Podcast Pontifications. That thing right there is a 4 times a week daily show I do that since you're listening to the roundtable, you should be listening to, since it is for working podcasters. Next week on the show, special guest, Dave Jackson, who taking over for me because I'm on break for a couple of months. But yeah, that's me.
You know, I had Dave sit in the host seat once on a short format show called Podcast Quick Tips, and that is hands down the most popular episode that show has ever seen. I think it's the only one anyone ever finds anymore and listens to. It was highly optimized. It was something. It's like something about how to name your podcast. So that's something people are searching for. But I think it was Dave. It wasn't the title.
It's all about the Dave, man.
So you're about to get the Dave bump.
Yeah, buddy. I can't wait.
Awesome. Well, let's get to some stories. Candace, I'm going to lead off. You're at the top of the dock here. And this Netflix story, what's going on with that?
Yeah, so Netflix is jumping into the podcast market with their original series. So they're getting, and I find this very interesting, right? Me being fairly new to the podcasting world, it's been a few months or so now. But seeing Netflix live and in action on my TV, along with Prime and Hulu and everybody else, right? To know that they are starting to flood into the market with their own original content is quite fascinating to me. And I'm wondering if we're going to end up seeing any interesting split between, just call it your nonfiction or your run-of-the-mill talk and your more creative film-like productions out there in the podcast space.
Yeah, I thought it's interesting. If you go so they teamed up with Spotify, apparently. So it'll be, I guess, what do they call it? Windowed, right? Where they release it for like the first 2 months and then to one place and then it goes out everywhere, which, I mean, we could talk about that strategy. I think it's fine. I'm, as a listener, I get it. As a producer, I definitely get it. So if anyone wants to talk about that. But I also noticed that they have a couple preview links there, and it goes to Spotify, the web player. And what they need to do, it's kind of funny to see Netflix show on Spotify. Like I don't know why it seems weird. It's almost like, hey, there's this massive platform, but they don't have their own platform for audio. So, who knows if we'll see that. I guess maybe some of their success or not success in podcasting will dictate that. But Spotify, you really need to be able to play these previews that you want people to listen without being logged in. Okay, on the web player. Let me press play without having to log in, because I'm just gone. You're losing a lot of plays that way. So I'm sure a lot of people are always logged in, but there are a lot of people who don't. I use Pandora and use Spotify. I'm not logged in. So I found that interesting. Definitely need to be linking somewhere where people can actually play the thing you are promoting. And it was interesting. The concept, I guess, is that the characters of the show after the first season go off to start a podcast. And that's what the podcast is, which I thought was cool tie-in. Yeah, what Evo's rolling his eyes, but I mean, I don't know. I haven't seen it before that way, but I don't follow that genre, so maybe it exists. Why do you roll your eyes, Evo?
I roll my eyes because let's go back to 2014 when GE, General Electric, created The Message. I don't know if you guys listened to that one. It was like the first, big breakout success of a giant brand paying lots of money to do why is GE making a fiction show? It was all about if we received signals from outer space. And who did the government turn to disseminate this information to the world? Why, a podcaster, of course.
I was upset because at first I thought it was real. I was like, wait, what?
War of the Worlds is all over, Dave.
They made contact in this pod. I was like, I am so in. And then I went to it and I was like, fiction in a podcast? I mean,
Orson Welles. He has some interesting stuff from earlier in the day, right? I mean, I roll my eyes at it because it's a little on the nosy. It's like I shouldn't say every, but so many writers are told, well, write what you know about, right? Yeah. And so they write a book that features a struggling author. And it's just a little too on the nose for me. I mean, it's too much about let's go off and do a podcast about it. And let's put it as a podcast. Because people who listen to podcasts love talking about people who, oh wait, that's exactly what we're doing. But nonetheless, it's I
created my very first podcast. Go ahead, Candace.
Maybe they think it's the safe choice. Now, I definitely agree. It's probably not the most creative, but if you're like, well, let me dip my toe into this water, might as well intertwine it in some way. I agree. It's borderline corny and very much on the nose, but hey, I don't know. It's a safe try.
When I first read it, I actually had a good idea, which I shouldn't say out loud. What I thought it was that the characters in the show had a podcast, maybe from the beginning. It was just part of this post-apocalyptic thing going on. And that you would sort of like get a peek, maybe like a few sentences would be part of every show that, they're in their pod. Maybe it opens up with them doing their podcast. And then that you'd be like, man, I kind of want to listen to what else they're talking about if they do a real good job at teasing you in that sort of in the show podcast. And then that would be the podcast. I was like, yeah, I would be vaguely interested in that, and not something I'd seen before. So
I wouldn't mind seeing
Netflix.
I wouldn't mind seeing a resurgence of like the old school, like 1930s radio plays and that sort of thing. Where you've got the guy with the pair of shoes on the table doing the walking, or the little door that they slam, and that sort of thing. It's kind of I don't know if you've listened like Night Vale, or I think the other one that I listened to is called I Am Alive. That's set up in a post-apocalyptic zombie world. But I think story-based podcasts, there's something that seems to be a little bit more untouched. I mean, it seems all the podcasts that are out there right now are very topical and less scripted, serial-like, step by step, like the old school, what eventually became soap operas.
I feel like this genre kind of became its own big thing, or that was like the fiction became. I mean, we've seen fiction early on, or Scott Sigler reading his book that he wrote, but scripted specific podcast fiction over the last year or so. And I'm trying to think, I mean, Evo, you hinted on this, that GE's The Mystery, or whatever it's called.
The Message.
There was that, and some S-Town, right? These sort of blew up, right? S-Town, Limetown. There was some other stuff. Some went to a Netflix show, turned into one, right? Like, right. So we definitely seen it and seen it be successful, but it's super budget.
Yeah. Well, then you have people like Sarah over at Girl in Space. I mean, she's doing, science fiction, but it's fiction. And I think Lore was not, that was stories, but that went to HBO for a season or two.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So,
well, I can going back in time because I remember all this stuff back in the day when we went. Podcast fiction started out as you mentioned, Ray. Scott Sigler was one of the first three to release his book as a self-narrated audiobook as a podcast form. He had a really smart person help him do that. And anyhow, but alongside that, one time there were about 1,000 authors that had released audiobook versions of their books in podcast form. But parallel to that, there was a huge number of people who were trying their hand at what we just called radio drama or audio drama. Then we now call it podcast fiction. And there were some really great ones way early on. There's still one out that's available now called Leviathan Chronicles. And there's several others that started back in 04, 05. People were doing this. The problem is doing a full cast scripted piece of work is really hard. It just takes a lot of time to not only to write, but also to sit down and narrate. One single voice, being Scott Sigler or any other author recording your own work. I mean, that's work. We all know how much work that is. But now do it with a cast that's distributed all around the globe. Sometime, right? But so there were early on fiction process or projects, and they're still going today. I think they've grown in size and are starting to get more attention. Dave, you mentioned Girl in Space, and there's a bunch of other ones. You know, if you check out what Will Williams is talking about, because she's all over the podcast fiction scene. She curated the whole track at Podcast Movement or for podcast fiction. It's really grown up because it's getting easier. We can now do things like this, where it was a little bit harder in 2005 to do these live in-person recordings. The technology's gotten better. Technology's gotten cheaper. Better microphones are available. So yeah, I think you're going to see a lot more of the fiction style. I'm excited about this, about Netflix jumping into this space and others jumping into this space, because if Netflix is good at one thing, well, it's business, obviously, but they have the ability to reach really amazing storytellers and give them lots of money so that they can write creative and compelling stories, as well as cast things in a way which are, I don't want to say beyond what indies can do, because we do some amazing things that indies can do, but really open the door to other creatives to come into the space, which gives us as listeners fantastic content that we can just now listen to and make the movie in our mind.
And I think even better than that, what's better than having Netflix behind podcasting? Oh, yeah. We're now going to put a push on the podcasts. They dominate, right? Netflix dominates, right? So they're about to throw, they throw money behind creators. They're about to throw money behind our platform, essentially.
Well, I mean, even with their programming, to be able to figure out, hey, you might like this, you might like that. I mean, if they'll start allowing in fan podcasts and that sort of thing, hey, I've noticed that you've binge watched, Ash versus the Evil Dead all weekend. You might like these 3 podcasts. Could be an entirely new venue for us.
Yeah, they have access to data that we don't have. And so if they can somehow parlay that data into helping us make better choices, dare I say, it might solve the discovery problem in podcasting.
There is the Netflix of podcasting joke we didn't make.
I was waiting for somebody else to make it. I made it several times when the news broke.
So okay, then let's pontificate, Evo, or anyone else, actually. I kind of joked that, Netflix is using Spotify because they don't have their own platform. Any world where we see Netflix saying this was successful, and Michael, you sort of alluded, maybe they open it up to other podcasters, which seems a little less unlikely. Netflix doesn't really deal in a lot of independent content that I've seen. But Dave,
well, here's my thought: they just lost a boatload of content, right? Disney, all the Marvel stuff is like, hey, we'll see you later, and Netflix is going.
This is why Spotify got involved, right? They want a bunch of stuff they don't have to pay for, first of all.
Well, somebody made that point at DC Podfest. They said, Spotify's not paying podcasters, and they go, and neither is Apple, and they go, but yet they pay musicians just, I guess, because they have to, but they're like, when is that going to stop? And I was like, that's kind of a good question. It's like, well, how come they get paid and we don't? Because we're willing to get paid in promotion, and it would take a podcast union, I guess. We're going to unionize and go on strike. I don't know. That'd be hilarious to try.
We didn't start from a place of payment, right? Like you do wonder either when are they going to pay podcasters like they do musicians,
which is almost nothing. That's the other thing that we should point out.
Yeah.
But also, when do they say, you know what, we have the platform that gets you the exposure that sells your albums? We're not going to pay you. Like, why should we pay you? But that's a world I know nothing about when we're talking about big record labels and all their lawyers. And so who knows?
That's true. They could turn around and go, hey, if you want to be on our platform, $5 a month.
Right.
So I have something to add, but Candace, were you trying to jump in with something?
Yeah, no, I was just saying, right, like I completely agree. My husband is in the music space and he's in the music business and the streaming and the royalties and you've got to have massive amounts of streams, right? Or you're supplementing in different ways. And so for us to even say, okay, start paying us like you pay in the music business, that's not like a huge hooray. That's not a celebration for us.
Right.
But CPM ads, it's equivalent to CPM ads.
But I mean, the reality is to your point, Candace, that, you have to have really massive numbers of streams before you make any decent revenue as a musician on Spotify. I would argue that you have to have massive number of downloads before you can make any money as a podcaster, at least from the advertising model. So that's not that different. Second point I wanted to make was, so it would be interesting, I think, was that kind of collective idea that, what if a platform like a Netflix came along and said, hey, we're really interested in curating new content that's not just in video form, but now let's curate content in audio form, right? And why not pay people? And maybe whether we window it, as you brought up earlier, Ray, or whether we just completely lock it as part of our platform. Netflix has an app. It's not a crazy notion to see them put a podcast section on that, and it's only available to those members, right? I mean, I'm just curious, by a quick show of hands or show of thumbs up, would we think that was a good idea if that was to happen? Do we think that would be good?
Yeah, sure. Spotify thinks it's a good idea, and they didn't think that apparently even maybe 2 years ago. I don't know if you guys listened to the final 3 episodes of Gimlet's what's the show? The Startup. Yes. Is it fascinating? Go listen to it because they talk about that deal and how Spotify brought them in and they thought they were being purchased and that it was really just to pick their brains about should we be doing podcasting?
Of course.
They didn't even know. They didn't even know. And we were all yelling at Spotify, when's this going to happen? And Spotify's like, wait, people want this? This is a thing? So funny.
Michael, you seem to be on the fence of whether that was a good idea or not. You want to elaborate?
Yeah, my fear of that is the curation of it is how you want to get the clicks. Well, you want to get, because in what I do for a living, if you want to get your posts and that sort of thing listed higher on certain web pages, you pay $50-$100 to show up at the top of the search. Whereas I think, if you now with the way the curation of podcasting is, if I'm looking for a podcast about, like I said before, Ash versus Evil Dead, I key that in there and I will get podcasts about Ash versus the Evil Dead.
Right.
Not really in any given order, but I'll find them. My fear with that sort of platform would be you have the larger podcasts that have the cash to spare, dumping $100-$200 plus for each episode to make sure they show up at the top of the list every time.
And I don't disagree. I think that's a reality. But, my narrow focus of this isn't with every podcast can be a part of it. This is Netflix saying, we're going to make a podcast section and Netflix are going to be responsible not just for curating the content, but actually soliciting people to come make shows. So if we want to do an Ash versus Evil Dead tie-in show, they could do that, but that probably would be the only one listed on that platform. And they will also go fund some fiction people and put some stuff together. That's kind of the way I see them.
What's the model? Like the model we're already seeing, right? Spotify is doing this. Pandora maybe might do it. In theory, Luminary is doing this.
That's where I was going to go, because Luminary did this. They did other terrible things, obviously, but that was their whole idea. We're going to make 4 brand new shows that, I said 4, I meant 40 brand new shows that have never seen the light of day. That's worth $7 a month. And then they 2 days before launch said, it's not really, let's put all 750,000 of them. And then we all lost our collective minds. But I wonder if it's a company like a Netflix, or by the way, HBO is doing this. HBO has already said they're going to have a new show come out and it's going to be actually in their app. You can listen on the app, on the HBO Go. It's HBO Go, right? You can listen to the podcast right there. I think we're going to see this happen. And I think where we might actually see it also happen too is not only in the app itself, but finally on the smart speakers.
Isn't the most incredible part that all of these huge players have decided that podcast is something they need to be in?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Everyone comes around to podcasts.
Has Amazon jumped in yet?
Yeah, in some way. I believe they did. I was going to say Amazon, but I feel like I could be wrong.
Yeah.
I feel like they did something in the space, but I could be wrong.
It's we're being corrected in the chat room. HBO Max is where my question is going to be, is that podcast that's on HBO Max, can I get that on Overcast? Or Maybe. Is it going to be only on HBO Max?
I mean, that's what Netflix is doing. Is Spotify is doing the window thing, right?
It's the window
will be
thing.
Everywhere, but they're going to launch on Spotify, which I think is fine. In fact, it's fair. I think as someone who is a podcaster and doesn't like to spend a lot of money, I'm willing to wait, right? And then the deals, if you want to hear it now, you pay your $7. You know, one of the huge things that Netflix has is they're like Amazon, they already have you. Like they already have a lot of people, right? Like Luminary tried to start from zero. We don't have anybody. We just need you to pay you $7 a month for podcasts. Good luck, right?
Yeah.
But Netflix has you.
Yeah, $130 million later, they still have nobody. Does anybody here listen to any shows on Luminary?
No. I did.
You did, and you quit?
Yeah, I don't.
Well, I quit because the show was over. So I finished it and it was done.
Oh, all right. Well, there they go. So they got what, $14 maybe?
I think with Netflix, just like Spotify, it's something to give to keep people on the platform, right? Like you're already here. Here's more, or it's value add. Like Amazon Prime gives you I didn't even know I got movies. I was like, oh, I get free shipping.
Oh, yeah,
I'll get movies with it too. I'm not going anywhere. They just keep adding stuff. Like Netflix saved themselves with original content. Like they blew up once they started creating their own content. And you're like, oh, okay, well, I love this show. I'm going to stay here. But I was already here. I don't know. There's something to that. But.
Well,
go ahead, Dave.
Well, and I think, Ray, don't you have your first comedy special coming out next week? Because apparently everybody on Netflix gets a comedy special.
Yes.
Go ahead. Evo, I think, has his comedy special coming out next week.
Probably. Yeah, that's what I'm working on my time off.
Yes.
I don't remember what I was going to say about that. So
I'm sorry.
Well, we have spent the first half.
I know, 23 minutes talking about one thing. Good job, Candace.
I was going to say, Candace. Wait, where's the? Okay, there's one of the 8 Rodecaster Pro sound effects you can click. That's stock. Candace wins.
I don't think it actually went through the stream. I just think it played live in your studio.
We heard it. I think.
No, you heard it. I just didn't turn it up.
Oh, it was just quiet.
All right.
Pretty quiet.
Oh,
there
you go.
You know what? It doesn't come through well. It comes through garbled because of the internet.
That's right.
Yeah. It doesn't sound good, but it sounds.
But you get the point. The point was Candace wins. All right.
Yeah.
Michael, let's go to one of the shows you've picked, or one of the topics you've picked here. Actually, you know what? I don't know if that's called burying the lead, but I labeled I start off this whole thing saying, who cares about past episodes or something.
Right.
So why don't you introduce us, Michael? That comes from this story, Michael's story. Don't forget about your podcast back catalog. What is this write-up about?
Well, it's talking about, it's being on the cutting edge of whatever topic it is that you're talking about on your podcast, whether it be politics or technology or movies or whatever, is great. But at the same time, you may have a situation where nobody's talking about it anymore, and it becomes old news. It's not like if you're talking the latest, greatest iPhone that comes out in another 6 to 8 months, no one's going to want to listen to why the iPhone from 6 months ago was so awesome. They want to know about the new one. So one of the focuses on this article was talking about making sure that a good portion of your show, if you can't do all of them, are evergreen shows, meaning that they would be shows that new listeners would be able to jump into after listening to your latest show and kind of catch up and discover you in the process. Now, what I like about this article is essentially like with our podcast, they're all evergreen shows. Nothing is so topical that you're going to be able to disregard it, because it's all talking about movies and TV shows and that sort of thing that people of different fan bases will like. And one of the things that we're working on right now is rolling back, and as we have shows pop up and open, day by day, we're coming up on 365 shows, and it seems to be a lot faster than it actually is. But our idea eventually is to have one of our older shows reposted on Facebook, reposted on social media every single day. So I like this because it reminds you to keep those shows that people will be able to learn who you are, learn what the theme is about, learn about a little bit about the people doing the show, so that way you build a little bit more of a bond with them.
Yeah, so I'm curious, how many people consider their show evergreen? Raise your hand. We got 2, 3, Candace. We got everyone. Me, sort of. This show, less, because we talk about, it is in theory. Usually we're just talking about how to improve your podcast. We are now going with more current event stories. So it is less so that way, or it appears that way on the surface. The Podcaster Studio, I designed it to be, something that you can learn from any time, but time does move on. Gear gets old, apps die and go away. Mm-hmm. So at some level, it's not evergreen. And then we know Todd from New Media Show, Todd Cochran. He loves to rant about no, everyone thinks their show is evergreen, and almost none are, right? That the tail of the drop off, you get your listens, and almost drops to nothing, right? No one goes to the back catalog, and I'm probably mischaracterizing what he says about that, but I think everyone likes to think their show is extremely evergreen, but their stats may not show that it does, that the back catalog does very well, but doesn't need to do very well. So Dave, what do you think? I
just did the math on October for the School of Podcasting. 65% of my downloads in October were from episodes that were not released in October. October downloads were like, from the 4 episodes I downloaded that I put out in October, that represented 35% of the downloads in October. The rest is all back catalog. That's why I always tell people, and this is why I always tell people with your monthly stats, people love to gauge their growth on their monthly stats. And I mean, I found a show last month, loved it, downloaded 64 episodes and listened to nothing but that guy for 3 weeks. That doesn't happen every day, but it does happen. And when that does, that guy got a 64 download spike one day, and he's probably going, there's got to be something wrong here. No, somebody found your show and they liked it. Now, the problem is, what if that doesn't happen next month? Then all of a sudden his monthly stats take a dive, and he's like, there must be something wrong here. So that's why I always say monthly stats for me are a great metric to see how is my back catalog doing. I still measure my growth by many things. We could get into that discussion, but in terms of downloads, I look at episode stats after 30 days.
Candace, do you think about designing your show and your episodes so they're evergreen, or do you just go with the next topic you want? Or are you thinking about people finding the episodes, later, a year later, month later?
Yeah. Yes. And so most of my, I would say about 80% of them fall in the evergreen category. So because I also have a business that's connected with the show, I'm very conscious of what I say and whether or not it's time bound for what's going on in the show. So a lot of times I will take and I will separate into a separate segment, if there's something I need to say about an offer that's going on or something like that. So I could always pull the segment and keep the rest of the show evergreen. So yeah, I try to think of, you don't want to waste content when you're cranking it out to every day. You put time and energy into that. You want to be able to reuse it if possible. So I try to think about it for sure.
Heck yeah. Yeah. I think the biggest mistake, and certainly we do this at my job where we produce a network of shows, is that we release an episode, we promote it, and then you really never hear about it again, which is ridiculous, right? So there's here's some advice that I'd give myself, things that I'd like to do if I had more time. And you know what? Elsie, I think she does the Twitter for Libsyn. She does this extremely well, and it's actually where I got it from, because the feed from Libsyn will release an episode, and the tweet will go out, and maybe it's the title, and you can only put so much in the title, but the feed covers a lot of how-to podcast topics, right? And so the first one will go out, and maybe it's what size should your album art be? I look at that and I say, I don't really care because I know the answer, whatever. And then another tweet comes out, maybe that next day, and it tells me, how to submit your podcast to Spotify. And I'm like, oh, interested to see what they say about that, given their lips and, all that stuff. It intrigues, it gets my interest. And the fact is, I wouldn't have discovered that from the title alone. So You can literally share the same content over and over again, as long as you pull out the pieces inside that content and you make sharing the same link very interesting and relevant to different people. So that's one thing to do with promoting even the same episode. With your back catalog, Dave, you have your Twitter set up. Sometimes I see the same episode too much, but you have the Twitter set up where it surfaces your back catalog, and I may have missed it. And then I'm like, oh, that episode 32 is still completely relevant to today.
Yeah, you have to be careful with that. I was using a thing called Social Jukebox, and it was pulling things out of my feed. But then I saw it like one day where it was like episode 400 reflections from podcast movement 20, like whatever, 16. And I was like, I don't think we need to hear that anymore. So I had to go back and pull that one out and things like that. I've actually at this point turned off my repurposing because I'm actually learning a new tool, going to be doing that, but I want to do it a little smarter. And just, that's one of those things like, yeah, you can kind of set it and forget it, but kind of after a while, you're like, yeah, when it says, look at InnerTube, which nobody remembers was before SoundCloud. And you're like, yeah, that probably shouldn't be going back out. That's from like 2006. That's got to go.
One of the things we do within the actual podcast itself is when we do a review of a movie, we go to the then and we do a recap of like music, movies, TV, and sports of the same week of whatever the then was. And occasionally it'll overlap with like, hey, this week, one of the movies that came out was Goonies. Hey, we did a Goonies show. That was episode 223. Go back and listen to that. And we will try and integrate whenever there's part of the topic of something that we've covered before, dropping it in there in the conversation saying, we did that show, go back, listen to it, hear a little bit more about us. And you see it in the numbers. Like I said, with the Goonies thing, if we do a show where that one of the previous shows pops up, I'll see a little peak in that show. So yeah, we're listening.
I learned that from YouTube. YouTube really taught me to be mindful of stuff I've already created, right? Like, and in fact, I can get new content based on stuff I've already created, thinking that, what, if I put a sort of a hyperlink in the video that says, that sort of branches off. YouTube is different than podcasting, is that often you need to be hyper focused and short. But, you can deep dive into, maybe I'm showing a camera. There's 5 different settings I want to show you. There's another video. There's 5 different videos. So, I mean, I like that, Michael, like making sure that, I think what you're saying is utilizing other content or making sure you point people to relevant content, to something they're already listening to. They like it, so they probably want to discover the other stuff that exists on your show.
Yeah, I mean, we give them a warning too. It's like, hey, we're this show, man, we remember we did that. That was show 14. And if you really want to hear what we sounded like before we discovered that we can buy better mics, go back and listen to it. It's...
Yeah, I think it's really important to, like, I think we all sort of start and just go, and then we get 20 episodes down, and you can remember everything that happened the previous 20. Then you get up to like the 5,000th, I can't even say the word. I shouldn't even be trying to say that. You get up to the 100th episode, like Dave. That's where I was going with that. That was a massive number for Dave. Dave, do you keep track of your past content, like a spreadsheet, so you could just type in microphone ATR 2100 and know that every episode you've talked about the ATR 2100?
I wish I had. If I could go back in time, I don't know, Evo, if you have the same problem, but when you've been doing it for a while, I remember there is an episode that I remember when I went to I was coming up with headlines for it, and I went to my website and typed in like, have I talked about this in the past? And the episode I had just recorded, I had the exact same title like 5 years ago. And I went, oh, and then I went and listened to it. I'm like, okay, this is new stuff, same topic, different angle at it. But yeah, that's one thing, because it is. The other thing that's hard for me is like, here we're talking about Netflix and all sorts of other stuff, and then I'll go to record an episode and I'm like, wait, I feel like I've talked about this, and then I have to remember which show did I say it on. I'm like, oh, I talked about that on the Podcasters Roundtable. I can talk about it over here because we haven't talked about this show. That drives me nuts. Or if I just, I have a Northeast Ohio Podcasters meetup, and we'll talk about something, and I'm like, I feel like I talked about this on the show. So I wish I had. What I do now is I have Zapier take my RSS feed from the School of Podcasting and put it into Evernote, because Evernote has a better search, and it takes my whole show notes and puts it into Evernote, so I can search in there and get kind of a little better idea what's going on.
Bang says, I'm showing a chat on the screen, which I like that StreamYard does this, especially since it covers up Evo. But Bang says that's what Google's for. And I don't know if he's referring to this, but that's what Google's for if you write good show notes. I do not do that for this round, but Google's going to start indexing and they're going to pick up my lazy backside and they're going to know everything that was said, right? That's going to happen. I don't know.
That happens to us when we're doing our brainstorming for show topics. Oh man, well we should do this. And it's there's that moment of pause and all of us are like, I think we did that. Is that something we did? So now we've got to jump back into the catalog and we actually have a spreadsheet for show ideas that we keep.
Nice. Keywords. Start tracking your keywords when you start a podcast, I think. At least just get the keywords down, the main topics, so that, especially main topics. Like you might hit on the ATR 2100, but you didn't really go into it, right? So this time you're going to cover it. But if you just literally went to a spreadsheet and put down the 4 main topics you covered in your episode, you're going to thank yourself.
Or you take my approach and each episode you talk about one topic.
Yes.
Man, talk about a time machine. If I could go back in time, that's what I would do.
You would do one topic?
I would do one topic because for the first show? Well, I did that. My audience said they wanted something bigger, but I would either expand and go deeper or something like that. But what I finally ended up doing, because I still have multiple topics, but my headlines were ridiculous. It'd be like, topic A dash Ray Ortega dash, $400 microphone. And so the headline was stupid. People were like, what does that mean? So now I look at it and go, okay, things like because of my podcast or whatever, like regular segments, those don't need to be part of my headline. I'm like, what is the thing that's going to make my audience click on that and play? Because with TV and radio, when you start them, when you turn on a TV, typically something plays. Not the case with a podcast. So you have to, my title is just, this is why I cry when I see somebody put the name of their show, like let's say it's the Dave Jackson Hour, and my title of my episode is Dave Jackson Hour, episode 116. I just go, please don't do that. So your headlines are hugely important. So don't put 5 things in your title. Pick the one that's going to make people share it or click it and go that route.
Evo, I get the feeling you think shorter podcasts are better, but I'm curious how that works out for you. I mean, you were pro one topic, pro 15 minutes or like.
Yeah, I think I'm on record of saying that I will answer the question of how long should a podcast be, and that is as short as you can possibly make it. So yeah, that's why I take one topic and I talk about that, and 15 minutes.
Do you listen to any long format podcasts though?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Yeah, so I quite a few.
I'm with Evo. I'm with Evo on that. My show is daily. But unless I'm doing an interview, which is once a week, they're in that 7 to 10 minute range. And people just love hey, okay, quick, I can digest it, I can go. And it is super easy to stay on track. So I'm with you, Evo, like one topic, note that topic goes to a blog post, you can search it, you can kind of stay focused, which is nice.
Candace, I'm curious, do you do video too then? When I see short format, I'm like, it begs to also be video. No?
Are you on YouTube? Don't. I would like to. Okay. Nope. Well, I'm not. I'm straight audio. I want to one day, but I haven't got there yet.
The other thing that allows you to do when you do one topic is it really lets you just squeeze every ounce of chocolatey goodness in the SEO category out of that blog post. As opposed to having 5 keywords about 5 different topics, you can really SEO that blog post for like when somebody types that topic, boom, I got a much better chance of coming in versus Google going, well, they talk about that, but they also talk about that and this and that. And so it just makes it super clear that no, this post is about topic A.
Only if you tell Google that you could make your show notes focused on one topic while you talk about 5. But as I just mentioned, maybe that'll be exposed in the near future.
Yeah. Good point.
Cool. All right. Good. We exhausted another story, I think. Cool stuff. Michael, let's see.
Uh-oh.
We have, I'm sorry. Let's go back to Candace. Will podcasts be the next $1 billion market? Why do they think that?
Yes. So there are a couple of different firms saying, hey, that the podcast sector is going to be blossoming into this larger $1 billion market. And, we already talked earlier about Netflix getting in the game and all the great stuff that Spotify is doing. And basically, they're just saying that there is a major consumption in people's listening time and listening hours, so much so that the market it's expanding, it's growing. So I think it's going to be very interesting how things evolve from a marketing perspective and any other middlemen that show up from an advertising perspective, knowing that the podcast market is so juicy, or forecasted to be even more juicy than it's becoming now.
Evo, this feels like it's in your wheelhouse.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about this?
So it's not, I mean, they're exactly right. I mean, if you look at the trend lines, talking about revenues made in advertising, that's where the $1 billion come from. Last year it was 470 billion. What's this year projected? Something like some change, I think, the number. I'm not exactly sure what the number is, but it's growing a lot. So yeah, the number comes from how much money is spent on advertising inside of podcasts. And so parallel to podcasting, I spent the better part of 2 decades running digital advertising agencies. So this stuff is but I can't. I'd rather not do any of that anymore. So what I can tell you is that we would all be amazed. You would all be amazed. Anybody watching right now or listening would be amazed at the amount of money that is on the table if it was easier to spend inside of podcasting. It's just not. It's really, really hard for some of these big companies to get in advertising. But a lot of that is changing. A lot of that is really changing, and not in ways that most podcasters are ever going to see. But for the shows that do generate 50,000, 500,000 downloads on their episodes a month, there are ways companies can monetize or spend money on those shows that are not direct buy. It's not a matter of calling up Twit and saying, hey, Leo, do you want to run an ad for this? That still happens, but it's an opportunity to say, I'm looking for female entrepreneurs who are from 24 to 35 who make $150,000 a year and do these things, running ads targeted against those people. That's where the big money comes into play, because when you layer in that behavioral targeting stuff, it gets interesting. Now, the flip side of that is the freak out factor. Wait a minute. How do we know this? What about GDPR? What about the California, all these various things? I get it. Those are all valid questions. But I can tell you this, the friends that I have in the ad tech space, they're not worried about this. They're still planning on getting a lot of money flowing into the podcasting space without violating privacy, without breaking all those rules, but finding new ways to spend it. When we can do that, the floodgates open. Because last year, $111 billion was spent in digital advertising. $111 billion. That's the money we need to be going after.
And yeah, I was just going to say but the 1% is getting, like, if anyone who's listening or watching this gets more than 50,000 downloads in the first 4 weeks of their podcast, please get in touch. I'm just curious. We want to get you on the show. I'm just saying. But also, I just don't think that's not the audience here, right? Like, do we care? Do we care? Why do we care as what I'm going to call independents or sub, niche podcasters, whatever you want to call, the market that's not going to see this kind of money. And even if the money does somehow filter to podcasts that get less than 5,000 downloads, you're not making enough probably to even have that sponsor. So I don't know that that's worth it. I don't know, Evo, any follow up as to why do you think this why do we care?
I think we care for a couple of reasons. One, it brings attention to the marketplace. Yeah. We as podcasters just get more people listening. As these brands are looking at it, they're going to be experiencing more things. They might start listening. Their people start listening. It just grows along with that. Where it might make sense financially is if someone can come along with a Google AdSense model. I don't know if any of you run blogs as well, but you can put a little snippet of JavaScript at the bottom of your blog page and Google Ads will start running. And you can make your $3.27 every quarter off of that without any effort whatsoever. There's an opportunity to do that in the podosphere. It's just very difficult to do because we've got things all split up and broken. But that's a possibility. But I don't think it's really where the money it's not the money that makes it attractive to independent people. I really think it's all about the attention that it gets and the legitimacy of the medium, which brings additional people in. I just see that as a good thing.
Well, I think with the the hobbyist podcasts or the podcasters that are not getting the 500,000 downloads a month, I think localization is going to be the key to getting a hold of some of that ad money. Is what's around you that your podcast may have a topic on. I mean, if there was in one of the towns nearby me, if there was a store that sold, oh, look, he just wandered off on me. If was a store nearby that like sold old school toys and old videos and that sort of thing, get paired up with them. They're nearby. You can do a podcast at the show, but you're not going to get the attention with less than 10,000 downloads or however many downloads a month of Google or GE or something like that. But the local, if you do a beer show, get a hold of one of the local breweries, find a toy store nearby. I mean, get local and then go out from there.
I know I'm nowhere near. Go ahead, Candace.
I think too, if you think about it, we're talking from the realm of just podcasting audio only, but you think about the podcasters, right? That also have blogs, that also have active social channels, right? I think about, these days, how I can bundle for advertisers, both doing a podcast feature or podcast commercial with a blog post, with maybe some social things. And that kind of changes the dynamic of just doing that, CPM type model or whatever we're traditionally used to in the audio only space, to bring an additional way to get revenue that leverages the podcast base, but also leverages the other channels without a whole lot of extra effort, right? Because your podcast content is your pillar. So I think there are other options, even if you do have that smaller base.
Mark Bologna does, I think I got his name right, Mark over at Beyond Bourbon Street does a show about New Orleans. And he's got like 2 sponsors. They're all hyper local. He gets nowhere near like the bazillions of downloads that you need, but he just went to this like kind of cool hotel and said, let's see, what does it cost to rent 3 nights at this hotel? Because if somebody's going to come here to visit, they're probably going to spend at least 3 nights. And he went to them and said, hey, the cost of 3 nights of your hotel is what I'm going to charge you for an ad, because that's probably what's going to happen when somebody listens to my episode. So Mike was talking about local stuff and having smaller numbers. That's definitely it. I talked with Heather Osgood, who does True Native Media. That's another ad agency. And she was saying how podcasting is a little bit in the middle, because you have TV and radio where in reality you don't have a clue how many people are really listening. And then you have Facebook where they can tell me the size of my toe on Tuesday during a full moon. It's crazy, the stuff that Facebook knows about me. And podcasting's kind of right in the middle. I can tell you where my audience is and that they listen on an iPhone 6, but I can't tell you how old they are and if they're male or female or things like that. So it's kind of in the middle. There are some tools coming out that are a little on the line there, but they're kind of in the middle. But it'll be fun to watch. I think having the big people come in, the big numbers. My thing is, does that mean that smaller companies are going to now look at that and go, the big shot smarty pants people are advertising on podcasts. If we want to up our game as a company, we need to do what they do. And maybe that'll bring in some of the smaller people. It's going to be fun to watch.
Well, that's where Google makes most of its money from advertising. It's not from GE and Ford and companies like that. It's from the bar around the street that has $20 a month they want to spend at Google AdWords, and so they do, and it just gets distributed around. But that's a little trickier to do. That's one thing. Second point is, does your toe size often fluctuate throughout the month, Dave?
It depends on what the weather is outside on occasion. I was really
hoping we weren't going to go down that route.
No.
Gout. It's the new title of the show. It's all about gout.
Yes.
It's a niche podcast right there.
Yeah, when anytime I sit in on a Facebook ad kind of presentation at these events, it's always just incredibly spooky on how creepy Facebook.
We're not talking about your toe right now, are we?
No, we're not. No.
Okay,
good. So
we got one more story. The much better looking Evo Terra Daniel. I don't know what's going on in the Google Doc. I know what's going on in the Google Doc. Evo's going on. All right. Consumers are drowning in content which means this will be our last round ever. Congrats to be on the last round. But we're
Yay.
going to do everyone a favor and pull the plug.
I made it.
You made it, Michael. You made it. What is this about? Evo.
Evil
And that
was
was
correct as well.
Evo.
that was a slip.
It's fair. It's fair. I'll always take it. So, yeah. So a very good article came out earlier in the week. I think it was earlier in the week. Yeah, just a day or two ago. Yeah, and it's really good stuff. So it's for Stephen Goldstein, who is super smart guy. Posts lots of great stuff. Really understands what media is like, what the media landscape is, with definitely a heavy focus on podcasting and smart speakers. That's what Steve's really his bailiwick is. And in this article he talked about, it's the reality of this. We have a lot of podcasts out there. Whatever the number is today, 750,000, continue to go up. There's lots and lots of stuff out there. And where many of the news articles we've seen over the last year is asking the question, is there too much? Are there too many podcasts? Do we have too much choice? And then, of course, we can jump in and say, well, Jesus, there were that many books published 4 days ago. There was just a huge amount of content coming out. So the point of Stephen's article here is not that we should stop making content, but the fact is that when people have unlimited choice, when we go to Apple Podcasts or Overcast or whatever, and we see the number that says 1 billion shows available, whatever the number happens to be, regular people, normal humans get paralyzed by that amount of choice. And so what's going to happen is new curation techniques, new ways so that the cream can rise to the top, which will just continue to propagate the discovery problem myth in podcasting, because it's not really that podcasting has a discovery, it's that your podcast has a discovery problem. No one's finding your stuff. And Stephen's articles, the main point of it is simply this: make better stuff. Just focus and make better, more compelling content. That's going to happen. And even if you don't make better content, Netflix is going to.
Yeah.
HBO is going to. The people who know how to make really great content are coming into the space, and they are making fantastic content. It's not 2004 anymore. We have to really, the independent podcaster, is going to have to up your game if you want to be starting to compete at this level. You don't get participation points. You got to make good stuff.
But Evo, that might be hard.
Yeah, I hope so. Yes, it will be. Yes, it will be.
Yeah, that's the fun part.
Well, I mean, if you look at the make better content type of thing, think about just the movies. You have independent filmmakers that are out there. I mean, Kevin Smith, look at Clerks.
Yeah.
I mean, that was made in a weekend. Why? Because they had a passion for doing it. They had really had a vision, and they wanted to do it, and they put 100% into it. And now Kevin Smith himself is his own little empire.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's possible if you can do it in the movies, which is overwhelmingly with these huge studios doing everything. You can do it in podcasting, where you can get equipment and, just like you said, it's hard. Yeah. I mean, crank out some good topics, crank out some good guests, crank out some good shows, and see where it takes you.
Well, and this is where coming up with something new is really hard. When there are 770,000 ideas before you, it's really interesting. When I listened to a show this week called Mike the Mime. That's right, a mime has a podcast, and it's this guy I met in DC.
A video podcast?
It's an audio podcast, and it's kind of like we were talking about before. It's audio fiction, and I started listening to it, and it's made for, they say in their description, it's meant for basically I'm not mature. There's a lot of not so much potty humor, but it's very not PC. And it's just like, and I was like, you know what? I'm not sure I would listen to this show, but I love the fact that it's not true crime. It's not an interview show. It's not on fire. I was like, I really love the fact that this guy's doing something really different. He has really great artwork. Not that matters in an audio podcast, but I went to the website. I was like, wow, this is not somebody like putting together their website in Microsoft Paint. So that's the thing sometimes is it's hard. But when you do, do something different, that's something. Well, I just told 4 people about it. I was like, this is kind of different, so it does make you stand out. But it's hard to do something different. That's let's get another late night show and find somebody named Jimmy to host it. I mean, that would be great. So,
to your point, Dave, I want to talk about this for a second. It's not like it's the pressure of having all of these shows that really forces you to be new and unique and interesting. Well, I'm going to go back in time to 2005. Ask a Ninja.
Oh, love that show. Please come back.
Oh, dude, I missed that.
Did an amazing job, right? Happy Tree Friends. And I use 2 video examples here as opposed to audio examples, but we had some really amazing things. People approached this medium and said, look, there are no rules. We can do anything we want. So yeah, I see people taking the easy way out and grabbing 2 dorks with microphones. That's what I was doing in 2004. But I'm going to go do something really interesting and compelling and use this medium to be artistic and creative and make amazing content that people couldn't stop talking about. I mean, I honestly think if it wasn't for shows like Ask a Ninja and Happy Tree Friends and The Radio Adventures of Dr. Floyd and a bunch of other ones like that, we would not have had remarkable enough content to get podcasting off the ground. If it was just a bunch of 2 dorks with microphones talking about science fiction in their basement, hi again, then we would not have had podcasting. Nobody would have cared. But because there were really compelling stuff that you couldn't get on any other medium.
Well, I mean, it goes back to somewhere in a boardroom, someone pitched tornado full of sharks.
And there's the other end. Yeah, right.
I mean, you throw it at the wall, see if it sticks. It's podcasting. You get the equipment. If you have a wackadoodle idea, put together 5-6 shows, see how it does, and if nobody listens and you get somebody knocking on your door asking for, hello, come with us, this is the badge type of thing, maybe you should cut it out. But I mean,
maybe.
What kind of shows are you making?
Are we unique in any way as a medium in that, this great content will crush good content, and that we get to be so specific, that we are speaking to a very purposefully small audience in a lot of cases, right? Like, where has this existed before? Mind you, we came before YouTube.
Yeah, we did. Mm-hmm. I will say this, and I think I'm answering your question. Here's where the opposite happens. You asked the question, will great content crush mediocre?
Well, he says that in the article. But
or even over in commercially viable. So no, I'm just trying to answer your question specifically. Here's one medium where it doesn't work that way. Radio, like broadcast over the airways radio. Radio is dominated by commercial garbage, but there are some amazing radio shows that are being made. People who make great, compelling radio that have a tough time getting heard, or at least they did until around the summer of 2004. And then suddenly a medium opened up for these people who are making great radio to make and put those available in podcasts. Yeah. So that is one place where the good stuff doesn't always rise to the top. Commercial interest in radio always rises to the top. Will that happen to podcasting? Probably.
Yeah. I mean,
is our competitive advantage that we can gather an audience around 500 people who also like making jackets that fit lizards? I mean, like, you know what I mean? Like something crazy, very specific, where you get Dave laughed because he loves that show, by the way.
It's one of my favorites.
I know, Dave. I've seen your podcatcher.
Lizards and Leather, I think is
it's called. Dude, see, I knew you listened.
Yeah.
I knew you listened.
I was going to say, our advantage is that it's easier to be experimental.
Yes. Yeah. Also, the barrier to entry is practically nil, right? So we can try, like you're saying, throw spaghetti at the wall.
Yeah.
There's no committee. There's no board of directors. There's no stockholders that we have to answer to. And we can move really quick.
But before we, throw all of our arms dislocations from patting ourselves on the back, that's not unique to podcasting. That's digital content that lives on the web.
Mm-hmm. Right. But consumers drowning in content, like, are they really? Because are you looking for all content? Is our competition all podcasts?
Nope.
Absolutely not. My competition is Dave and Evo, and I have plans to get rid of them. So my competition's almost nil. I didn't say that live.
I'm suddenly not so thrilled to be here.
Oddly enough,
Extra.
next week on Podcast Pontifications, Dave will be talking about competition amongst podcasters who talk about podcasting. How niche can you get? And he will answer that question, which is why he's being quiet right now, because he knows he's not going to give away the answer.
No one's watching this. Come on, Dave.
No one's listening to my show until Dave shows up and says, "Watch my show." Listen to my show. Then suddenly,
we're like 59 minutes in. There are 3 people left, and they're the hardcores. Okay, thank you, all three of you. I think it's the 5 people on the panel. I'm kidding. There are people in the chat. Are you kidding me? Stephanie, Bandrew, Bangs. We got the chat is still going. Everyone's awesome.
Credit.
Super cool. But yeah, I mean, just back to this idea of like drowning in content again. Are consumers really, like, with search getting better, with Google going to surface stuff, podcasts that are very specific to the thing you are searching, if it makes sense to surface the podcast, like the consumer doesn't know that there are 750,000 podcasts or 2 billion podcasts. Do they feel that pressure? Is it because when they open a podcast app, they see the same shows on the front page, right? Like, is that where they're getting, like, what's the real problem here? Is it the consumers are being shown a lot of the same stuff because it's high value, that whole pay to get to the top? Well, there's a reason that a lot of times the bigger shows tend to surface toward the top. I mean, even if their money goes into the investment of making the program to make it that much better to surface to the top, or they have a major media program behind them, there's a reason they're on the front page of Apple with a special little banner. Like, I don't see that happen a lot to independents. But beyond that, is the consumer, do we think the consumer really feels like they're drowning in choice if the idea is to go and search something you're interested in? I'm just curious here.
The thing is, like,
oh,
sorry, Candace, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think it kind of depends on if you take the broader content lens and not just podcasting, the broader digital content lens. I think it depends on which platform you're consuming that content on as well, right? You think about if I'm going into a Netflix, especially, or a Hulu, or even Prime, right? Where the world options are shown to me versus, I see this top of the list feature on Apple Podcast, or I'm going on YouTube and I know exactly what I want to look for, so I'm going to search, right? I think it depends on which platform. I think you feel it one way more than the other, again, just depending on the platform that you're on too.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, I was going to say, I mean, like, I think part of the situation is that, like, if I go to a podcast app and I'm like, oh, I want to find a new podcast, very rarely will I go to the new and noteworthy. I'm going to go in and search for a topic that I'm already passionate about. Whatever that topic is, I'm going to key into the search bar and then scroll through that and see what's it attracts my eye. I think that is the niche that we have to look at. Is if you're doing a show about lizards in leather jackets, make sure you are the best damn lizard leather jacket. That's really hard to say.
I'm going to have dreams about lizards. Thank you.
The question is it lizard leather that they're wearing? Are they wearing jackets made of themselves? That's the real question.
That would be kind of creepy.
Have you guys realized that this is a show that I've been making for years?
Yeah.
Just asking.
I guess the reason why I don't think they're drowning in content is, according to our buddy Tom Webster, they're only listening to 7 episodes a week. If they were all like, I just looked because
how many shows do you watch a week? Like, I mean,
a lot. I mean, I have 218 episodes.
But you don't listen to them. You don't.
I do. I've listened
to
about 3 today. I think.
Your job. You're different.
That is true.
I'm also curious though. Like, what approach will Spotify and Netflix take? Will they teach the viewer, the listener, to look for stuff they want, or are we being trained to just take what they give us?
That's what. Yeah, it's that one. I mean, take a look at Netflix. Try to search for something on Netflix. It is intentionally painful.
Yeah.
If you have one strange search and suddenly your whole suggested movie thing flips on end on you.
Right. And the same thing happens. I mean, we don't see it because we're podcasters. We don't see it because we're blind to this idea, because we know what's going on. But most people who open up their podcast app, most normal humans who don't have a podcast, whatever app they use, they listen to whatever's on that homepage. That's what most people do. I mean, that's why they have it there. I mean, I know for a fact that like it's not just podcasting; it's books. Go to Amazon, open up your Kindle. And the next time you open up your Kindle and you go list, you're going to see books on the front page. And if you're a savvy book reader, book consumer, you're just going to skip through that and you're going to go to maybe the recommended for me stuff, but you're going to work around. But I can promise you this, because I've heard people from Amazon tell me this: with a push of a button, they can sell 50,000 copies of a book in a day. Just by pushing one little button, it goes, make that one available. 50,000 copies will sell in one stinking day. And I have to assume that there's a similar effect like that takes place on the big platforms, and why the shows that are listed on top tend to get more access and views, because normal humans are happy to have people tell them what to do. I'm happy to have Netflix tell me what to watch. In fact, I get aggravated when in the first 3 rows, there's not something that seems appealing to me. I think Netflix has done a bad job if that actually happens. So I think the same thing happens to podcast consumers who aren't cranky old podcasters.
Yeah, that might be the case, because I know for me, I just listened to Ira Glass being interviewed by the guy from Startup, Alex Bloomberg. Yeah. So I was like, that was a pretty good interview. Ira always seems to have some pretty good insights. So I just went to Overcast and typed in Ira Glass. There are 12 episodes waiting for me. If I wanted to, I could download those. But again, that's because I'm a cranky old podcaster and I know how to search.
When we talk about selling, quote unquote, podcast to others, the pitch is, what do you like? Right? There's a podcast for you. Go check it out. The pitch to new listeners from apps or what might be Netflix or Spotify is not that. It's not, the pitch is not, we have what you're looking for, we have what you're interested in. It's, we think you're interested in this, which is dangerous, because it seems dangerous because we're also teaching people. I like the recommendations once you're in, I get it. But people who are sampling podcasts don't find something that hits their interest, and then they say, yeah, podcasting's not, I'm not really interested.
Exactly.
What do we do about that?
Make better stuff.
We make better stuff. It's not going to. You think that if we made better stuff, it will surface?
I think if we need to give those platforms, those platforms have plenty of people making great stuff. So those platforms are going to be less inclined to take a risk on a Kevin Smith Clerks. Mm-hmm. Today, because they don't have to take a risk on a Kevin Smith Clerks and list that up front. They will only do that if they see some indication. It's the Rocky Horror Picture Show thing. The only reason Rocky Horror Picture Show continued after 6 weeks is when they looked at the ticket sales. They said, hey, it's the same 8 people coming back week after week after week. Let's put this thing on Friday night at midnight. It's that's kind of model. If you want to be a part of that consideration set, if we want to make sure that your shows are there, and we also want to protect podcasting, we need to make sure that the really great shows sit on top. Now, I will say this: I don't think they've done a good job. I think there are some shows that are very popular that the majority of people don't really care all that much about, like 3-hour-long talk shows, which aren't, that people get the wrong impression about podcasting. So I think the app makers sometimes fall down a little bit about pushing out those things that are the most popular, which is why you'll see the most popular tends to get buried further and further down in the podcasting space, because it's always the same shows recommended. I think they're doing a better job curating the better content that lives up there, so that people don't have a bad experience the first time that they listen.
Fantastic. Well, I think we're about ready to wrap up. We did lose Candace, which is too bad. I think her connection might have gone out. But as we go out, if you have anything to add, definitely drop it here. But let us know where you want anyone still listening to find your podcast. And we'll get out of here. Let me make sure I get Candace's website so we can leave that way. But Michael, thanks for your first roundtable. Thanks for joining us. And last minute, too. Thanks, man.
Yeah, not a problem. I was really it made my week be able to join you guys. Like I said, you guys helped me through a lot of hair pulling out sessions trying to get my podcast up and running. Now you can go to 40go14@gmail.com to email me, or 40go14.com to find our podcast. We're all over the place, but yeah, if you like retro reviews, seeing if the original is better or worse than the remake, 40 going on 14, look us up.
Did you catch all that stuff with the net behind you, Michael? I'm just curious.
That net is because I don't do video podcasts.
I like it.
I had to get my hands on a camera, and then once I turned the camera on, I realized I podcast from my basement. It looks like this. It looks like a scene from Saw back there.
Sure.
I didn't want to freak you guys out, but I kind of it is what it is. I tried to dial it up a little bit in the time that I had, but.
If you're listening to the audio only version, this is at least once around we have an excuse to go check out the video version. So youtube.com/podcasters roundtable. Check out Michael here. I'll even make it larger so that you can really focus on what's going on behind Michael. We talk about classic video podcast shows that were huge. I was a huge fan of Tiki Bar TV, and that's what that reminds me of.
Tiki Bar back in the day. Tiki Bar TV, that was so great. Yeah,
favorite. I loved it.
TV. I mean, some of the things that I have floating around my desk.
Nice. There it is.
Yeah, Tiki Bar TV was one of my favorites.
He actually has the set. I think you stole some of the set from Tiki Bar TV.
Check this out.
Look at this. Oh, see. There was a reason I was getting that vibe.
I thought that was a bong.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Show that again. That didn't actually? Okay.
Oh yeah, ready for it?
It says Tiki Bar.
It's the Tiki Bar.
He has a cup from the show. Get out of town.
Fantastic.
That was amazing. That was good, Dave.
Thank you.
That was amazing. Wow. Very cool. All right. I'm very happy. That is a great way to end. But Candace, thanks, Candace, for joining us. Candace Spears. Her podcast is Ambition, Honey, and Hustle. You can go to CandaceSpears.com. I like that she has her name.com, and you can jump off and get her podcast from there. Dave Jackson, co-host. Thanks, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me as always. Dave Jackson, schoolofpodcasting.com.
Oh, wait, I got Candace back. Candace, I just gave your website and the name of your podcast, but thanks for joining us, Candace.
In stop motion animation.
Yeah.
So
I got a thumbs up.
All good.
Oh, thanks. Awesome.
Having internet issues. All good.
We all do at some point. I'm pretty sure people who listen to the audio only version, I do apologize. There are several dropouts. I promise that all the parts were dropped out when Evo was talking. I didn't do that. I don't have a button for the Rodecaster Pro on that one, but I probably should get one, like the Evo button. But yeah, if you missed something, I am sorry. It was the internet, and I can't be blamed. Can't be blamed for the internet. All right.
My turn.
Evo. Yes.
Me, Evo Terra. Check out Podcast Pontifications, podcastpontifications.com. I'm taking a little bit of a break over the winter, but I'll be back in January 2020. But until then, you'll hear Dave Jackson next week, and I have a few other special things lined up at podcastpontifications.com. If you're watching the video, that's the logo.
Right on. Evo hibernates. So that's apparently the season we're going into. And yeah, check it out. If you listen to this show, it's a podcast about podcasting. You'll dig Evo's podcast.
It's much shorter.
I watched the YouTube version as I told him. Sure. So, but that means I don't catch every episode, which I'm going to be honest. I only catch it when YouTube. This is another issue, right?
I mean, 4 times a week, you can't catch every single episode. I totally get that. And if it sounds much better now than it did, like at episode 27, when Ray called me and said, "That's a nice big fat microphone you got there, Evo." Not with that setup. You need to get this little device inside of it. So I bought a Fed head, and the show sounds amazing now. So
that's amazing. Yeah, at least something good came of it. If you join the show, I will give you a hard time about audio or headroom or something related.
Oh yeah,
as we should.
That reminds me, if you do want to be on Podcasters Roundtable, if you are still listening or watching, that is definitely you. You don't go this far without wanting to join us. I know it. So podcastersroundtable.com/guest, sign up. You'll get a form. It'll ask a couple questions like availability. You can toss some topics in there, and I will get you on here eventually. Eventually, takes time, especially when we do this like 5 people at a time thing. But and 3 of them are crammed with with co-hosts. But we'll get you. We'll get you. And podcastersroundtable.com. And we will see you next time. Wave goodbye. See you.
Cheers.
Later.